time to wake up and pray up here on the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast, where we talk about all things in life that just can include life, I guess, as we try to find our faith a little bit more and try to avoid losing sleep, because these are topics that kind of keep us up at night, or keep myself, my two co-hosts up. So we reckon that it kind of keeps everybody up at night a little bit there. Am I saying how the podcast goes, Pierre? Just exactly right.
Well, not exactly right, but yeah, I mean, you got the gist of it all. We're just ordinary people talking about our own faith journey, trying to find our faith, and then touching on some of the topics that keep us awake in our own faith journeys, questions that we have, things that we come across in life, and just try to discuss it and talk it out.
Yeah, and it's been a minute since we've been able to get on together. We've all had kind of conflicting schedules, even though you and your wife are kind of the co-hosts of this show right here. We just haven't been able to get together, it seems like, Michelle, in quite some time, 2, 3, 4 weeks, possibly even. But we are here. We are dedicated. We want to get these shows out on a regular basis. But sometimes, as an amateur podcaster learns, it just doesn't always coordinate that way.
It's true. And Pierre and I have actually had this conversation. I'll let him go into it a little bit because he has numbers and statistics a little better than I do. But we've really gotten out there. And I told Pierre, I really feel like the devil's kind of been at work because we're actually reaching people. And I feel like we've come across obstacles on purpose. So I think it's really important and, that we meet and that we push through somehow. And so we apologize for the break. We are thrilled to be back, and we will push on through, not let that devil win.
Sounds like sabotage, if you ask me.
I agree.
Hey, whenever you start reading like the book of Ephesians in the Bible and stuff, and it talks about the things that we cannot see, the principalities, the things of the world and the things in the air, and it can creep you out. I went to a meeting one time, and there was this guy, a really educated man, a smart guy and everything, and he knew he started pulling out all these different Bible verses, and they were good Bible verses for how Satan works and how the devil works, and how there's these battles that are going on that we can't even see. And I was a younger Christian, so it was kind of cool. But Pierre, it scared me. It scared me because I couldn't see what was going on. And I was like, oh my, what is up with this?
Mm-hmm. I think that's part of it. It's not a battle against flesh and blood. It's against spirits and souls. And as you stated, like our last episode did well. So really shout out to the listeners and those that tuned in and continue to tune in, maybe share it. I think we've reached like 31 countries now, which is pretty shocking, given we're just average Joes trying to talk through our faith. But yeah, I mean, we don't see some of the battles that are taking place in our lives. And so the thought of that can definitely creep you out a bit.
It does, but it's coming close to Halloween, so what a time to be creeped out. I mean, that's a good time to be creeped out. By the way, what was your favorite go-to Halloween candy, Pierre? Do you have one of those?
Oh, it's tough with the candy. I'm a big fella. I ate a lot of it. Probably Twix. Yeah, I was a big Twix person, so I like Twix back in the day.
Now, here's a prime example of that, Pierre. People just heard you kind of crackling up right there. Okay, you just started crackling again, and we had that one episode where all of a sudden this crackle got introduced, or the static got introduced, Michelle, if you remember that a couple of episodes ago, and we didn't want to re-record because it was such a genuine episode, and we apologize for it, Pierre. You did a great job producing it and trying to remove as much of it as possible, but it's beyond our control. Pierre and I do another podcast as well called the DFS Dreamer Podcast, where we talk about football. And not one time does that podcast have any kind of static, any kind of crackling noise. So this started happening a couple of episodes ago, and we couldn't figure out why. And then it continued on to the next episode. So we had to pause every 5 or 6 minutes. You guys had to unplug the microphone or unplug your headset, whatever you had to do from the computer, and put it back in, and then it would stop. So it's like a random action that is it's unexplainable. We can't figure it out. And I know Michelle has her theories.
I just explained mine. I think I really feel like the devil's at work in this one. About the time we started taking off, we did a few episodes, never had the problem. And then all of a sudden things start going well with this and we're reaching people and we're getting positive feedback, and here comes the crackle and we can't fix it. So we've tried all kinds of things too. I mean, we have theories where Pierre and I are in separate rooms this time. We thought maybe that would help. Wes called us instead of us calling him, and nope, there it is.
Speaking about following the show or getting in touch with us, you can do that at Finding Faith Pod. That's a Twitter handle over there. You can find me at Lofinit. You can find Pierre at Peewee31. And you can find Michelle at GoPackGo411 over on Twitter. And don't forget, you can email the show if you have any questions, comments, concerns. If you'd like for us to be able to talk about a topic, we'll be happy to do that as well. FindingFaith.LosingSleep@gmail.com. You can do that. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, all those things. Share it with everybody else if you can. Word of mouth is always one of those things that works out best whenever you're organically growing, like Pierre says that we are. I don't know if we are or not. Pierre says that we are. I'm not too worried about all that stuff. But it's always fun to be able to reach more people and to get exciting questions like we had on the last episode.
Yeah, which is crazy because as you remember that question, I kind of mentioned the whole Giselle and Tom Brady situation, and if I'm not mistaken, they could be on the splits. Question was about, just how to kind of respond to if your prayers differ from your partner's prayers. And so that was unique. I felt so. I mean, obviously, hopefully they can work things out, but it sounds like they're on the ropes. Maybe he's not sacrificing, maybe she's not, who knows, but it was just crazy kind of how I used them as an example, just based off a story and how their own story has kind of developed with Giselle and Tom Brady.
And it's been an interesting topic, not necessarily that one. I don't want to get too much into their drama that's going on. I got plenty of drama involved in my own life. It feels like nowadays, having a teenage daughter, different things like that. Just we're always running, we're always going, we're always moving real fast. It feels like in life. And in the last show, when we were going to talk about the topics that we were going to talk about, I was like, okay, well, we'll talk about that. And then Michelle, you wanted to talk about some things that were a little bit different. And Pierre, you entitled this episode "Yesterday, Now, and Always." And so before the show, I was like, okay, what are we actually going to talk about? And so, Michelle, I want to throw it over to you just so you can kind of talk about what this episode is going to be.
Sure. I guess the best way to say it is I feel like God calls us to tell our story. And we'll get into the now part in a few minutes. But I just felt really convicted, and I felt like God was calling us to just tell how he is working in our lives, how he has in the past, how he is currently, and that we know he's going to be there in the future too. So I guess I can just kind of start with the, yesterday. So in my yesterdays, I was not overly strong in my faith. I always had faith, but not overly strong. When Pierre and I started working together, he'll be mad that I said this, but I did not like him at all. And
here we go.
And in fact, I felt sorry for his girlfriend at the time. So anyway, fast forward to we were working together. I was actually pregnant and ended up having a miscarriage on Christmas Day. And thought that was my one shot to be a mom, and that I would never actually get to be a mom because I was getting older and wanted that time, to be with someone before and know them before, going into motherhood or getting married. So anyway, when I had my miscarriage, I just really believed that was it. And God knew better than I did. So through my miscarriage, Pierre he sensed that there was something. I didn't really talk about it at work. I think he really just sensed that there was something, and I saw a change in him, and he was there for me and a great friend. And I just saw him through a new lens and as a different, he was different to me, or maybe he wasn't any different. Maybe my eyes and my heart were different. And so through that tragedy for me came the biggest blessing of my life, which is Pierre. And through Pierre, we now have Olivia. And so that's the very, very short version of the very long story of how God worked for me in my yesterday. and I couldn't be more thankful. And honestly, I wouldn't have the same level of thankfulness, and I wouldn't know what that even looked like had I not gone through that. And so I guess I wouldn't say that I'm necessarily thankful for my miscarriage. I see the blessings that have come from it, how God worked things for the good. So I guess that's mine.
No, I get that. And sometimes while we're in the moment, we don't necessarily see it. In hindsight, whenever we start looking at things after we've gone through that valley, like we've talked about before in a couple of episodes ago, if you haven't listened to that one or downloaded that one, go ahead, go back and listen to that one. I think you called that one Valleys, Pierre, if I'm not mistaken. But that was always a good episode. And I don't think I shared the story all the way through about the house fire, and you can go back and listen to that part of it where me and my family had a house fire. We just had a little baby girl at that time, and at the time you don't know what's going on. I remember my wife at the bottom of the driveway. We had this little hill kind of a driveway. It was a cool driveway really, because we sat on a cool house. We sat on top of this hill in this area. And so, as you drove by, people always said, man, that's the prettiest part of land that there is here in this area. And I was proud of that. Yeah, I was really proud because I didn't really have a house growing up or anything. We just bounced around from place to place. So I was kind of proud of that. But the hill, there was like a rock driveway, and it was a flat part up on top, and you went down. It was a little curve at the end. But the thing was, it was dangerous down there at the bottom of the driveway because it was somewhat of a busy road going right there in front of the driveway. And so it was kind of dangerous. And I remember my wife, whenever that fire was there, and we were police officers, chief police, fireman guy was standing there too at the bottom. And I remember my wife just saying, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. And I was listening to her, and I was like, well, I got a wonderful wife, but I just don't know what to do with this situation. I remember thinking to myself, Father, God, you've brought me through a lot of things in life. I'm going to trust you're going to get me out of this one too. You're going to lead me through this. So as my daughter got older, and you go through all the natural things, we bought another house and everything like that, and teaching my daughter how to ride a bicycle, which is pretty cool. As a dad, teaching my daughter how to ride a bike, and she was learning pretty good and everything. And the day we took the training wheels off, and we're out there in our little cul-de-sac. We live in this cul-de-sac, right? And so I got my hand on the back of her seat, and I got the other hand on the handlebars. And as we're going along, I release my hand from the handlebars, and I just keep my hand on the back of the seat as she's going, and I keep her steady and everything like that. And we came up into my neighbor's driveway, and that's where we kind of got our running start. And so we got going a little bit. And I held onto the back of that seat, and my daughter turned around over her shoulder while she was going, and she said, Daddy, you can let go. And I thought, man, that is so easy for you to say, as I did. I let go, and I watched her start riding her bike on her own. And I was like, oh boy, that's something right there. That's special. And I'm telling you, I was sitting in the middle of the cul-de-sac, or standing there in the middle of the cul-de-sac while I watched her go away. And it hit me. It hit me just out of the blue. Some people would say it's an epiphany moment where like God's talking to you or something like that. I don't want to say God's talking, but man, it all made sense because that driveway that I had at the old house with the little S shape, she didn't know how to stop her bicycle. And at the moment I thought, boy, this is going to be horrible. My house burning down, don't have a place for to live, all that stuff. But it made sense to me right then. And listen, this is 7 years after the fact or something, however long it takes for a kid to learn to ride their bike. And I was standing there and I was going, oh, she wouldn't have been able to stop her bike. She would have rode out in the middle of the road. And of course, my mind starts traveling like that a little bit. And I was going, oh, thank you, God, for sparing me that pain, because that would have hurt a lot worse than just my house burning down. That's what I thought of. And I don't know if that came, but that was a now moment that later on went into a then moment. So it all kind of made sense. And we can't make that kind of sense whenever we're in the moment. Sometimes we just have to trust our faith, Pierre, that we're going to be able to get out on the other side and have it all make sense and see that God was taking care of us throughout all of it.
Yeah, that's one of the obstacles, though, in the now. Like, it's easy to look back on it, as you stated, but I know, like, with myself, I've lost both my parents, and I felt like at a pretty young age. So my dad, I was about 21, 22, senior down at IU. Got the call about him, Game 7 of a Cubs game. Obviously, big Cubs fan. It was right after the Bartman game, so they lost that game. I got the call about him losing his battle to lung cancer himself just after that game. So that was tough. And reason that one kind of hit me a bit is, so my parents were never like together. They weren't married, but my mom had some struggles with substance like my whole life. And my dad wasn't in it early on into my life. He kind of came on a little bit later. She let him see me here or there. They had their own personal struggles when I was a baby that I don't remember. But, there was reasons that I was kept away from him initially. But he changed his life around, got to see him. But knowing that my mom had some substance issues, like there was always that thought, I'm probably going to end up with my dad someday just because of the things that my mom was doing. Great woman, even amongst her abuse, loving woman, would give you the clothes off her back. But that didn't happen that way. My dad went first. And so it's like, oh no, what's going to happen now? Something happens to my mom. And thankfully that didn't come till down the road. We're now about 5 years removed from my mom passing as well. But that was the big one. Like for me, my mom was the usual one. And, Michelle could talk to that, or I didn't eat for almost a week. She had to basically look at our daughter and stare at her and stare at me to basically say, if you don't eat for yourself, you better eat for her just to get down food. And then it's like almost like an envious type of feeling came in because you start to look at those that have, parents. At this point, I'm 30, 35, no parents, no grandparents. So you start to envy those that have both, that have one, that have something when you feel like you don't have anything. And it's crazy because we ended up moving to the city that we live in now after my mom passed because Michelle wanted to move closer to her parents, which is a natural reaction after, your spouse loses his mom. So we moved here, and her cousins had attended a church, invited our daughter to a summer vacation Bible school. She went there. So once we moved here, we decided to go to that church, and, we kind of fast forward a little bit, and that's the church that we, call home today. We are both life group leaders at this church. We serve at this church. I got baptized at this church, which was something my mom had me promise her that I would do for myself, not for her. But I don't think any of that happens, honestly, if I don't lose her. And you don't realize that in the moment. But, I mean, I went to church here or there. It wasn't like I didn't believe in God and wasn't aware that he existed, but just the life I was living, you couldn't tell. I know we had that chairs analogy. I was definitely probably in chair 2 at that point where I was just doing the bare minimum, showing up to church here or there, thinking I was good. But her passing kind of started the change in my life personally when it comes to my spirituality.
Yeah, and I heard it in Michelle's story. I heard it in your story as well, Pierre. And I know it's in my story of the reason why I was able to get through those things was because of the love of other people. And I think the love of other people is really, really important in our walk with the Lord. And also it just in our way of life. If we shelter ourselves from others, and I want to say good others because there are bad others out there that we could really cling to try and help us get through moments in life that may not be profitable for us. But the Bible tells us, to love one another, and that's how we're going to know each other. A new commandment I give to you, I love one another as I've loved you, so must we love one another, Jesus said to his disciples. And so we got to surround ourselves with people who are willing and wanting to love others. And so, Michelle, I kind of want to direct this question towards you about what people can do to show that love to one another. I know it's kindness and everything, but how do you make yourself accessible to kindness, to love? Because nowadays, as we were talking about earlier, I'm always running around. It's hard to get involved in other people's lives. How can people go out and find a way to make their life accessible so that when the tough times come or when those now moments come, they're able to be loved on by people who are willing to help?
The easiest answer I can give to that is get involved in a church and a life group. Pierre and I, literally this past week when we were in life group, I looked around, and we've said often that, we really appreciate the life group because we went through Rooted, and what Rooted is just kind of a process, is like a book that you go through together, but it really digs deep. And when I say deep, I mean deep. And so you are literally sharing, like you're bearing it all to these people, and they know you, all your faults. And like, if you're really vulnerable and they still love you and care for you, Pierre and I have talked so many times that we have seen God move in that life group like no other. Prayers being answered, just to see things come to fruition. And it has been incredible. And I personally am so thankful. I'll be honest with you, I never thought I would ever join something like that. When we talked about it, we went, I was like, yep, that's not going to last.
Yeah.
And I mean, truly, I was like, oh, that's cheesy. I don't need to do that. But we stuck it out, and I could not be more thankful, because when there is something about that specifically, like when we go to church, it is amazing, and it's great to feel the spirit there, and our church is amazing. And you know, when you go to the service, I always feel fired up and I learn, and I appreciate that. The difference that the life group gives for me is that when you go to church, you don't always get people's stories, and you don't hear what's going on in their lives all the time, unless you stay after, that sort of thing. And so when you're in that life group and you're vulnerable with these people, you really know what's going on in their lives, and you really get to see and you get to witness God working. And it's absolutely incredible. So I'm just super thankful for that. I'm glad that, God led us to that. And like Pierre said, it's really not any of our doing. Like, it was him that put all of this together, because we would never, like, honestly, we're living in a town that I said in my whole life, because my grandparents were close, and I said, oh, who would ever want to live there? I'm never going to live there. My dad said the same thing. Guess what? God's like, that's cute. Like, watch this. You'll both live there. So anyway, if you don't mind, I would like to kind of go into a little bit of what happened to me, or not to me, but why I was so upset this week. So when I try to do this without crying, when I was diagnosed, or actually let me back up. When I found the lump in my armpit last August, not this past August, in 2021, I wasn't sure what it was. I just knew that I had, something that was bothering me. Honestly, I thought I needed to buy a new bra. I thought it was the underwire in my bra, and because it was annoying me for months and months and months. And I would kind of tuck my shirt in over there because it would just drive me crazy. Oh. And my oldest sister has had breast cancer twice in a very short amount of time. She happened to be home for our family reunion, and I literally just went to like fix it again to adjust my bra, and felt something. And I was like, what's that? So I said, hey, Terry, can you come feel this? And so she asked me when I'd had my last checkup. And so obviously I went and did that. Kind of fast forward from August, it took from August to December of jumping through hoops to finally get to have a biopsy and get an answer. So who knows how long it had actually been there.
And this is like COVID era time too, right? I mean, this is around that complicated area of life. So that's one of the reasons why it took so long.
It is. And I just kind of had to jump through hoops like a long time. Plus, when I did go to get a mammogram and another ultrasound, they said, well, you'll have answers today. That was in November. No answers then, because 3 radiologists had no idea what it was. So then it was finding, a surgeon, and like on and on and on. So anyway, fast forward to December, I finally had the biopsy, the surgical biopsy, because at this point it was 7 centimeters and very large, about the size of an apricot. Oh. And when they went in, they went ahead and removed the whole thing, because it was actually 3 lymph nodes all together and hemorrhaging. So at that point, when we got the call in December, we were on vacation in Tennessee, and I got the call, and the surgeon had prepared me that it was most likely lymphoma. So I was prepared for that. My aunt had passed away from a type of sarcoma, which was horrible. So when the surgeon called and said it's melanoma, to be completely honest with you, I was like, thank you, Lord. I was so thankful, because it wasn't lymphoma, it wasn't sarcoma, it wasn't all these horrible omas that I had heard, other than melanoma. I thought, oh, skin cancer. Okay, no big deal. Wrong. So, so anyway, I don't know if I've talked about this on here or not, but we went very shortly to a little Mexican restaurant to get some food, and just trying to kind of, okay, we'll get through this. It'll be okay. And kind of, it's all settling in. And I get a phone call. It's only been about an hour, and I get a phone call from the oncologist, and he's like, hey, you need to come in right away, and we need to get your treatment started. And I was like, okay. And he's like, so when are you going to be back? And let me know if there's anything I can do to make you more comfortable. And I hung up, and I'm thinking, why would he say that? I feel fine. That's weird. Like, I didn't tell him I was in pain or anything. And I realize it's the holidays, but that's kind of strange.
Right.
So we get back to the house we're staying in, and what this treatment's going to look like. So went upstairs and I looked, and that's when I saw, basically if you have melanoma that's spread to your lymph node, it's super important to get it as early as possible. And at this point, all I know is at that point, we thought it was still in there because she told me she didn't want to remove everything before surgery. So we thought it was still there. And last I knew, it at least has been there since August, and probably many, many more months before that. And so everything I'm reading says you basically, when it's in your lymph nodes, you have a couple of months or weeks to live. So Christmas was rough. Thankfully, we went that second week to Florida and saw my sister who had breast cancer, and it was very helpful to see her. But what I'm getting at is one of the things that happened was a guy that I went to school with reached out to me, and I didn't know him well. We had a very small school, knew of everyone basically, but didn't know him overly well. And he said, hey, I just want to encourage you. My wife has the same diagnosis, and she's about a year ahead of you, and she's currently cancer-free.
Hey.
And that was such a guiding light for me. And she and I have been in communication a lot, and she is amazing. She has used this to share God with people. It is so cool. And I'm sick. I don't know that I've ever been more thankful for someone I have never met in person. And so she's just really such a beacon of light. So the other night, I was getting ready to go to bed, and somehow my hand hit Facebook, I guess, hit the button as I was putting my phone down after I set my alarm. And I kind of glanced down and I saw his name. She doesn't have Facebook. And I saw his name and I saw her name, and I was like, oh. And so I kind of picked my phone back up and looked. Pierre was already asleep, not for long. And I read what he wrote, and I saw that her melanoma is back. And it wrecked me. And I couldn't figure out why. I mean, obviously I was upset for her. But it was much deeper than that for me. And then I felt guilty. I had this guilt around why am I taking this so personal? It's not my diagnosis. Why am I being so selfish? This is about her. Like, why am I being so selfish? And I really wrestled with it. Of course, Pierre woke up and we talked about it for a little bit. I did not sleep well. Took Olivia to school the next day, and I come back home and he's like, are you okay? And I'm like, trying to be. And I'm thinking, man, Michelle, this is ridiculously selfish. Like, you were being really selfish right now. And I was kind of ashamed of myself, if I'm being truthful. And I said, you know what, I'm going to go start my work day because I work from home. So I come upstairs like I always do, and I shut my office door and immediately opened it back up. No idea why. And I just kind of stood there. And, when you have things hanging on your wall, I mean, you don't always look at them every day. I mean, they're there, so they kind of just become part of the wall, right? And I just stood there and stared at this cross that my best friend had bought me. And I just stared at it, like just kept staring at it. And it says, we walk by faith, not by sight.
Okay.
And I'm like, okay, I guess I needed to see that right now. So I come, and it still didn't really hit me. And I come and I sit down, I start to work, and I keep my Bible and this little Jesus Calling devotional book on the left side of my desk. And I just kept feeling like I needed to look at them. And I was like, I've got work to do. And so finally I'm like, okay, fine. I'll just pull the Jesus Calling book out and I'll look at it, because it will take me a couple of minutes. So I open it up to the day. And as I'm reading through that day's devotional, it says, walk by faith, not by sight. And I was like, holy cow. Okay, I guess I really need to hear that today. And then all of a sudden it hit me. I was like, oh my gosh. Here I thought that, the blessing in this melanoma battle was that I had learned how to give it to God, that I'm doing it really well. I'm so proud of myself, tell people about it. And all of a sudden I realized I'm using her as my proof. Like, she's my proof that this can be beat. I'm putting my hopes in her. Like, I haven't given this to God. I'm still trying to control it. And so then we go to group and I'm sharing it with them. And I don't often raise my hand in church, like, at the end when the pastor's like, raise your hand if this is going on or that's going on. Well, a couple of weeks ago, he was talking about talking to the Holy Spirit. And, one of the things was like, Holy Spirit, use me, Holy Spirit, convict me, that type of thing. And I raised my hand for convict me. And I wasn't sure why I felt so convicted. So we're in life group and I'm explaining to our life group about this epiphany I had about her being the proof. And Pierre starts talking about the lesson, the pastor, what he talked about. And he said the word convict. And all of a sudden it dawned on me, I have this whole other epiphany that I asked the Holy Spirit to convict me to see the things that I'm not doing that I should be doing, or that I could be doing better. And he did exactly that. Like, he literally showed me, Michelle, you're not putting your hope and your faith in God here and knowing that he's got you. You're literally putting your hope and faith in another person. So I guess I just felt like it was important to put it out there, because sometimes we can have the best of intentions and God can still show up in ways that we just never thought possible. And like you said earlier, Wes, those epiphany moments of, wow, had that not happened, this couldn't have happened. And I believe there's a blessing in everything. And, you can always learn, but perspective is huge. And I think to show us sometimes our own perspective, because it's so important to have people pouring into you and understand you. And like, I'm thankful for you guys. Like, you and Pierre are amazing at this. And I just thank you for bringing me along.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, because I did take it a little bit personal whenever you said that you were more thankful for that woman that you had never met before over anybody else. And I was going, well, you never met me either, Michelle. I'll just be honest with you. No, hey, listen, it's encouraging to hear other people's struggles. And I don't, that sounds terrible. Look, Perry, you said we got to 31 different countries or whatever it was. And that's a good thing, because I always struggle to find English. I don't know that English is my first language, and I don't know really what is, because I struggle with English. But it's probably from my education more than anything else. But it's encouraging to hear other people's struggles, because you get to hear other people's victories in those struggles. And that's something I've learned in life, is that there's a lot of people who have been through a lot of stuff, and I've shared before about poor little Wesley and everything, and that's how I always carried myself, and that's how I thought of myself. But man, sometimes I hear other people's testimonies, and I'm like, whew, I'm glad I didn't have to go through that. They're a lot stronger than I am, and to hear other people's struggles gives me encouragement as well, that, hey, if they can do that, I can do that. If their faith can be made stronger, my faith can be made stronger. And you were talking about life groups, Michelle, which is, kind of, people call them different things, small groups, Bible studies, different things about that, where you just kind of share about life. And some people call them bars. Some people call, some people call them park benches where where just older men in this area of the world, they get together in the morning time at breakfast time. The same guys do all the time. They meet at Jack's or Chick-fil-A and they talk about life. I suspect that's what they do because there's not much. Maybe they go through the obituaries and make sure each other's there. I don't know what they do necessarily, but that can sound intimidating to others to share life. But I think we all have those people in our lives that we share them with, but maybe they don't give the same kind of counsel that godly people can give, and people that are trying to struggle with their faith, trying to work out their faith a little bit, that want the best for others. And as we go through life, I've learned that all things are like a decision that is followed by a process. A decision followed by a process that continues to go on, and we continue to make that kind of progress in life all the time. Pierre, I don't know, is that how you kind of sum up life groups as well?
Yeah, I mean, different walks of life, different backgrounds, different upbringings, all that kind of plays into a part, and you get to see just different opinions. I know we talked about options, that first episode that we ever recorded, and it kind of opens up different options because you don't know what other people have been through, what they're going through. This has been like throughout history. Like you think about the Bible, how long the Bible has lasted. And I think it was even like a philosopher was Voltaire that stated back in the 1700s that the Bible would be, gone in 100 years. And if I remember the story correctly, after he passed, his house was purchased and ended up being a house that Bibles were sold out of. And it's just because of, those type of stories and lives that people live that are just proof that there's something more, that there's a higher power. It helps encourage you and what you're facing. But what you tell also encourages others because it's different walks of life. And, who I connect to isn't going to be who Michelle connects to or who you connect to, Wes. So that's why our stories are important. Our own journeys are important to share with others, to give them hope, to give them light. But that's ultimately coming from God himself through us to them. And we're just planting seeds.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I know that can sound intimidating to get active and involved with a group of people that may, ask you questions. And I personally, I always like going to a bigger church if I were to go visit a church, because when you go to a big church, people always say, well, I'd rather go to a small church. Well, if you go to a big church, you just blend in with the crowd. People don't know if they're supposed to know you or not. You know what I mean? And people get scared to say hi to you because they're like, well, they could have been going here for 5 years and I've just never said hello to them. So don't let the size of the church intimidate you about going. To me, if you go to a small church, you kind of stand out like a sore thumb sometimes because everybody knows each other and they're like, who's that stranger? But if you go to a big church, everybody can be a stranger at times, depending on the size of the church. That's my thoughts about that.
I agree. Often felt the same way. Yeah.
I think I just think it's important. And, as we talk about the future, you say the kids are the future. We're the future. We are the ones that are planting seeds in our kids. We're the ones that are actively, in the church, and folks are looking to us for guidance, whether they're in the church, or whether they're out the church. If they don't know Jesus, it's our jobs to introduce them to Jesus, to who he is. And it's our jobs to have the right identity out in this world as well. If they see you as a church person, you're under a spotlight now because they're going to expect you to behave and do things in a certain way. And yeah, we're all human. We're all going to make mistakes. But we know right from wrong. And so it's our jobs to make sure we're pushing that out to the world, of those that are in the church, of those that are out of the church, of the kids. We're the examples to set. And it's about love, above all else, love God, love your neighbors as yourself. That's what it's about. And if you're pushing that out, then the future is going to be much brighter versus taking it out. And I think that's one of the biggest issues right now is people are trying to take out God, and history tells us bad things are going to happen when you try to remove God from the equation in your personal lives and the world's lives. And so that's what I hope for myself, moving forward, is to just make a difference for the kingdom. I thought the other day, with my mom gone, her birthday would have been on the 9th, and I don't have much, of her when it comes to audio, video, etc. It just wasn't popular back then. So I'm actually grateful for this podcast, because if that day does come, or when that day comes for myself, I'm hoping my daughter can look back and see the man that her dad was and the faith that he has. And maybe these conversations might help her in her adult life, or in an area where she's struggling, and she can come back and listen to the faith that, her parents had, and then move that forward with her own faith, hopefully.
Boy, that's a good plug, Michelle, for the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast, isn't it?
It is. And I tell you, I've had that same thought. I just knew that I probably wouldn't get it out without crying. So I'm thankful that Pierre did. And by the way, Wes, I did think of you when I said that about about being thankful for someone I hadn't met yet. I thought of it right when I said it. I'm like, Wes is probably going to say something about this.
Well, I didn't want to cut you off in the middle of your story, and especially when it turned into a story about her, who sounds like a wonderful woman. And I understood what you were saying about that, because sometimes, and Pierre, you may know this even more so than Michelle, because you were a sports fan your whole life. I think Michelle is just one of those, bandwagon Packer fans, is what I think she is.
Oh, don't you even start with me, Wes.
No,
don't get her fired up. I gotta live with her,
she'll like you after she is done not meeting me. But we can put a lot of stock in heroes like that, and whenever their world gets shook, we sometimes get shook as well. And I want to say that about celebrities, not just sports athletes. But I remember growing up as a kid, I had a superhero, and his name was Walter Payton. And I just absolutely did not think anything could hurt Walter Payton. I didn't. And then we saw him, kind of, I don't want to say crumble before our eyes, but his life changed after he had a diagnosis with, I think, liver cancer is what he ended up with. And then some stories came out about maybe possibly what affected some of that stuff, and some of the, things that football players do to relieve some of the pain and everything. I think that he did. And you see some of that, and I'm like, oh man, Walter, I want to say kind of did that for his fans. He maybe did it for himself a little bit too and stuff. But I hate that something like that happened to him. But I know as a kid that really shook me up a little bit. But we definitely don't want to put our weight into those heroes that we have in life, whether or not they're personal ones like you, Michelle, and that lady. And what a blessing that lady has been to you, and what a testimony she has. I'm sure that she shares over and over again. It sounds like that you had. But Pierre, I know that we can have our lives shook up with celebrities or sports people if we put too much weight into them.
Yeah, I think the too much weight's the key. Like it's fine to look up to people. But once you start to idolize them, that's where you kind of get into that false idol type of crowd. If you're putting them above God and above all else, you will see how they are just like you, how they're human, how they're broken, just like anyone else. And they're going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. Everyone's going to make mistakes. Jesus was the one, that lived that perfect life because we couldn't. And that's going to be the case for the future. There's no one else that's going to live the life that he lived. That includes celebrities and sports. And it's tough because that's what's in the world. That's what's on TV. That's what's in our face. And so it's easy to be like drawn to what you see versus what you don't see, which is why I always talk to, just getting in prayer yourself. I never like to start off with the church. I do think that the church is great. You're going to build your faith in the church. But for those that are hesitant about church, either from their past or just from what they see as an example of those that attend church, just start with your own home, and pray about things, and God is going to show up for you in a way that a celebrity never could.
No, definitely. And Michelle, I'm glad you shared all that as well with yourself and with your friend. What a great story that was.
Well, I know I can get lengthy, and so I tried to keep it as short as possible, but I didn't want to lose some of the context that was in there. She's such a special person, and I know she's going to beat this time too, and she has a great outlook. And I will tell you, it's also kind of prompted me to start, not just be complacent in the treatment that I have currently, like to start looking at things and are there other alternatives and options and what's out there, and to, be proactive instead of reactive. And, I love my family. My parents are amazing. My siblings are amazing. I have the most amazing best friend on the planet, of 30 plus years. And we have a really great support system. And gosh, my husband and daughter, I just am so thankful. So I have a lot to fight for, and a lot to be thankful for. And it's choosing to look at those blessings that God has given and know that he, like we said earlier, the perspective is huge, because you can look back and see, okay, through that tragedy, here's what he did. Okay, then here comes cancer knocking. Here's what he did. And that should be enough to go, okay, I see what he did yesterday. I see what he did now. I know he's going to be there in my future. So that's why I felt like this episode was so important, and I felt really convicted. So I figured if I felt convicted, it must be that Holy Spirit conviction that, I raised my hand for. So I just wanted to, I felt like it was important to get it out there.
I think about Jesus too. Jesus he didn't stop his ministry whenever a hero of his passed away. And I think that one of his heroes was his cousin, John the Baptist, was a guy who was very strong and adamant about the love of the Lord and for people to obey God. And he didn't hesitate at all to tell people those things as he was baptizing people in the Jordan River. He would call the Pharisees, the Sadducees, snakes in the grass and stuff like that. But he actually got in trouble one time because there was a king. The king's name was Herod. And John the Baptist, he told Herod, hey, man, you're married to your brother's wife, and that ain't right. That's just how John the Baptist was. And John the Baptist ended up in jail throughout that time. And his wife didn't like John the Baptist talking like that because she was the queen. But she was wrong in the fact that she was married to Herod's brother. Herod wanted to marry her, so he married his brother's wife. And so she didn't like it. And there was a thing, and his daughter, a little party or something like that, and her daughter was dancing before the crowd. I don't know what kind of dance it was, but Herod sure was happy at her dancing. And he said that he would give the daughter anything she wanted. And the mother whispered, tell him that you want John the Baptist's head on a silver platter. And the king didn't want to do it because he was afraid of the people. Plus, I think he was a little bit amused by John the Baptist. If I'm not mistaken, that's what the Bible says. He was a little amused. And everybody kind of wants accountability. So I think that's what the amusement was to some degree. But he didn't want to disobey. He said he made an oath, so he did it. He killed him. And that news shook Jesus a little bit. I believe Jesus looked up to John the Baptist. I think he liked his boldness. Jesus talked a little bit like John the Baptist did at times. This is the guy who baptized Jesus. This was his cousin, the whole story that goes around Jesus' birth. So I think that they had somewhat of a connection there. And Jesus even made a joke of John the Baptist being in the king's palace wearing only people in the king's palace wear fine linen purple clothes. And I think he was talking about John the Baptist at that time because John the Baptist was not wearing fine purple linen clothes. He was in a dungeon. But Jesus didn't let that news stop him from continuing to his ministry, continuing to speak out on the things that God had him to speak out on. And I look at that as a point in his life that he kept going on. And so I do want to encourage everybody. News can shake us. News can get us shook a little bit. And we can't let that stop us from continuing to do the right things because God doesn't forsake us. God's not going to leave us. God's always going to be there with us. We just may not be able to see him there at that time, but we have to have the faith. The faith is a little tiny mustard seed sometimes that can grow up bigger, and we can see things in hindsight as we continue to walk by faith and not by our sight. And one day, stuff becomes a little bit clearer for us. So I do want to encourage all the Finding Faith and Losing Sleep people to be able to do that, Pierre.
And I'm glad you mentioned John the Baptist, because one thing amongst this journey Michelle's been going through that kind of came about that I came across was Matthew 11, 1 through 11. So to set the scene, John the Baptist is in prison right now, and he's heard about the deeds of the Messiah. He sent his disciples to ask him, are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else? Basically asking, are you the Messiah or are you not?
And I think he does that sometimes, Pierre, too.
Mhm.
Just to emphasize to his disciples who Jesus was. Go ask him if he's who he says he is. And then Jesus, of course, he has a ministry opportunity to those people, because maybe those people look up to John the Baptist a little bit too much. John the Baptist was always that voice crying out in the wilderness of Jesus who was to come. So I think that was part of his plot.
And the reply is really what jumps out at me. So he doesn't just give a yes or no answer. These are red letters. Jesus replied, "Go back and report to John what you hear and see. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and the good news is proclaimed to the poor." And then right here on 6 is one that I think we all need to kind of take hold of. It says,
Okay.
"Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me." And when you think about that, how I read that is miracles are happening all around us. Lives are being changed, healing's taking place, people are being saved. But don't lose hope if it's not you. Don't lose hope if you're not the one being healed, if it's not your family member, if that's not who he's doing his miracles on, because blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of what he's doing in the world. The proof is still there. You still have the signs. It's all there. But he says, and he quotes, "Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me," which I take as on account of what he's doing. So take heart in that for anyone listening. I hope to do that myself. Obviously, I told the struggle of my parents and losing them, but blessed is still those, who don't struggle on account of what Jesus might be doing for others and not doing for them in each moment.
Yeah, and sometimes we can't see what he's doing for us. Our eyes get closed. Our eyes might get a little bit blinded. Our eyes might get a little bit distracted. In that same chapter, Pierre, Jesus says, look, John the Baptist, he came out here with fire and brimstone. He didn't eat. He didn't drink with the people. He wasn't out amongst the crowd. He wasn't doing anything to please anybody. And then the Son of Man came talking about himself. "I came out here eating and drinking. I went to people's houses, and you guys said I was a drunkard and a glutton." God can't do anything to please you. One guy does one thing and one guy does another thing, and you say that they're both not doing anything for God and not doing anything for you. And all the while, God was calling people throughout both of those ministries that John the Baptist had and Jesus had, but it was the people's eyes that were blinded. It wasn't necessarily God running away from them or not trying to draw them in. It was the people not accepting what God was doing in their life. So sometimes we have to open up our eyes to see those things, Michelle.
Oh, it's so true. And I know we've talked about this in previous episodes, but when you're in the midst of it, if it's, we say unanswered prayers, but sometimes we see it that way just because it's not the way that we want it to go, or it's not in our timing, or we prayed and prayed and prayed about this. So why is it not happening for me? I feel like it's going to, and it's not. I don't understand it. But it's because there's a better plan for you, and you don't know it, but God does. I know that with every fiber of my being, because when I tell you that I believed I was never going to be a mom, like I knew that. It wasn't like something I felt like I just knew it wasn't ever going to happen. And it was impossible in my eyes. And God knew better. He knew what he was doing. I just couldn't see it because I didn't have that perspective yet. I didn't have it. I couldn't understand it. It was unfathomable to me. And yet here I sit with a 10-year-old and an amazing husband. So,
amazing husband. You hear that part? Amazing husband.
I did. I heard that, partner. I sure did. I heard that. I heard that. I'm the unforgettable one. Hey, that's a great way to end this podcast. We're at that limit anyway, and we do appreciate you, Finding Faith and Losing Sleep family out there, for listening to us, for sharing the podcast, for subscribing, for leaving comments, for leaving reviews, all those things that you have done to help promote this podcast. We can't thank you enough for that. We appreciate you also going through our little technical adventures with us just a little bit. Tonight, I started breaking up for some reason. I switched rooms. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear that in the podcast or not, but I started walking around with a laptop and a microphone in my hand to switch rooms a little bit. I was going to get hardwired. That's what I got to do next time. I got to get hardwired is what I think is called. But that's what we'll try to do for the next episode of Finding Faith and Losing Sleep podcast. Great job, Pierre and Michelle.
You too,
Thanks,
Wes.
great to
That
you.
devil's not going to beat us.
Okay. I like how she says it with confidence. Make sure you're following the podcast over on Twitter if that's your thing, at Finding Faith Pod. You can also follow me at Loafing It. Follow Pierre at PWE31. Follow Michelle at GoPackGo411. And don't forget, you can email the show if you have a topic you'd like for us to be able to talk about, or if you got a question or anything, we'll be happy to answer those as well. FindingFaith.LosingSleep@gmail.com. But more importantly than all those things out there, Finding Faith family, we always want to encourage you to find a way to make a positive impact in somebody's life today.